Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, in this video, I just want to continue with this analogy or this similarity that we have with NPD and cluster B, the similarity to the experience of people who have addiction issues. Okay, now notice that I'm not describing the actual situation of a cluster B as having an addiction. Okay, it's not that we have an addiction; it's that we have a similar balancing problem, I believe, with our neurotransmitters between the serotonin systems and the dopamine systems. Kind of that inverse relationship where there's already an inverse relationship between rises in dopamine and decreases in serotonin. It's just that I think in certain people who might be susceptible to addictions or people with personality disorders, the relationship is more exaggerated. Okay, so that at least in my case, and I think for a lot of people with cluster B, we run a heavy risk that if we're in a chronic or an acute rise of dopamine system activation, that our serotonergic systems will kind of crash out and bottom out. Okay, and what does that really mean for us? Okay, so I'd like to focus this video kind of on how we might develop a strategy for approaching recovery or coping. How we're gonna build a workable lifestyle around having this condition or this temperament. And you can look at it as an illness, or you can just look at it as this is my condition. I'm sure there's a lot of healthy people who have very sensitive neurology, and they have to find ways to develop a lifestyle that works for them. So with that insight, how would we develop a lifestyle that works for us, and even to for the people around us, so that we can live better lives, and maybe even live lives that we can never even imagine. Um, so I'd like to kind of focus this video on that issue, and I approach this from the point of view of phenomenology, because I'm not so much interested in how objectively our symptoms appear or focusing on the symptoms. I want to look at it more from our experience. Okay, someone with NPD, someone with borderline, they don't perceive themselves on the inside. They don't perceive their experience on the inside the way other people might perceive. Someone else might describe a narcissist as just being an arrogant asshole, makes other people feel bad. A person on the inside with NPD might, who knows, I can only talk about my experience. It's just feeling on edge. It's just feeling urgency. It's feeling kind of, sort of like just the edgy feeling, the feeling of being kind of, when you're on the edge all the time, it's sort of like everything is just kind of, life becomes kind of like a machine. It's sort of like, I don't know how to explain it. There's a part of you that's not there. That's how I can say it. But you're sort of caught up in it. And then other people, they have their perception, but on the inside, it's just kind of the anguish of the hustle. I guess it's the feeling of being in the hustle of life. And it's it may be an exciting experience, but it's in the end, it's not a good place to be. So anyway, so how are we going to approach the problem of how do we approach getting better or making a better life for ourselves, and also how do we deal with the fact that we're kind of missing something. So anyway, so just to lay a little foundation. I do personally believe that this tendency to have an exaggerated inverse relationship between dopamine and serotonin, I believe that must be genetic. But I do believe that if you're raised in a situation where you have chronic, sort of people fighting, just things unstable in the family, being everything just being on the edge, I think that environment could probably produce a chronic, sort of a chronic elevation of the serotonergic system, which would have, I'm sorry, dopaminergic. Okay, so it'd be a chronic rise, chronic heightening of dopamine, the dopamine part of us, and that would mean a chronic kind of depression of the serotonergic system. So that right there is a platform for feeling very empty, feeling very restless, feeling very bored in your own skin. Um, and sort of driving you in a already in a vicious cycle to seek more dopamine, and which is already what you have too much of. Okay, so it's sort of like you just sort of get trapped in the dopamine world, so to speak, and that's already even before you take your first drink or you take your first cigarette, you're already in the addictive platform. You already have an addictive neurology, so whether that's it's hard to say. I mean, because I think um, some of that is conditioning, but I do think there are some people like me where when the dopamine goes up, the serotonin just crashes. Okay, and I think that's the part of me that nobody gave me. I mean, I was born at that, so. Um, like say my brother and sister are not cluster B. They're not like me. They also live a lot for the dopamine. Okay, and they really that's kind of their lifestyle. So maybe they are chronically just a little bit low in the serotonin, but I think they're not crashed out like I am. Okay, and that's the difference. They live lives, so they love eating well. They love doing their legal drugs or their whatever marijuana, but they love living for pleasure, but you can tell they don't have that terrible emptiness, and so somehow they can have a life of a lot of dopamine, but that doesn't crash out their serotonin basically. So I can see the difference, and I think a lot of people who privately have issues with addiction or with cluster B, they kind of know in their heart that there's a difference, that they can't really be as carefree and living a life like other people can. It doesn't work for us because we really lose something. We have an instability, um, and we came from the same family. I'd say my brother and sister maybe even had more trauma than I did. So what's the difference? The difference is, I believe, the genetics. So I mean that's how I see it. Other people may have other experience, but that's just how I see it. So how do we approach the real problem of what are we going to do about it? Okay, so I tend to take a phenomenological approach. I'm not really too concerned about the arrogance, the haughtiness, the looking down on people, whatever. Those are just symptoms. I mean, what's really happening? What's really happening is an imbalance with our neurotransmitters. So how do we approach that? Okay, I approach it really as conditioning. It's awareness and conditioning. Okay, so I want to approach this the same way that a person with a drug addiction is going to approach their issue. Okay, basically, I just have to find a way to get my lifestyle in a place where I'm rebalancing what is not balanced, and where I'm maybe reawakening with the things that have been kind of like put down to the point where they're almost dead. I mean, not dead, but deadened. Basically, there are parts of me, whole parts of me, that are like deadened because I tend to be hyperactive in the dopaminergic dopamine system. Okay, so basically, how are we going to sort of wake the dead? Raise the dead. Basically, I think it's important to say it in those terms because I think we don't just live in the prosaic world. The poetic world also is very meaningful to our soul. Our soul is not just a prosaic soul. There has to be a poetic part of us that also may be suppressed, And in today's culture, I think the poetic world is kind of, it's sort of like, whatever. But I think it is part of us. And I think we shouldn't be afraid to say, on some poetic level, raising the dead is really what's happening, So we shouldn't be afraid to say there maybe even a shamanic component to this, not just practical, So we should just be open to that, like to see it as a poetic process as well as a prosaic process. So how do we raise the dead? Shamanically. Well, I mean, there's probably a lot of ways to do that. I tend to not be a big fan of the magic. The quick magic. I'm not really into the ritual stuff. I think maybe for some people that might be a way of sort of just awakening something, but in the practical day to day. Okay, I think the magic is good to just kind of open our eyes, maybe, however we want to seek the magic. But I think in the practical day to day, I think it is really just a question of how we design our lifestyle. Okay, in other words, I know from my experience that if I'm living in a situation where I get a lot of dopamine rises, okay, and that can come from getting in fights, okay, arguments, having a lot of conflict, listening to very high, how would you say, listening to, like, say, news dealing with, like, really, like, the war in Ukraine, or like a crash in the stock market. Obviously we have to be exposed to information, okay, but we have to be aware that those things can really spike up the dopamine, okay. And then, of course, the things like eating delicious food, eating high fat food, fried food, very flavorful, sexual activity, romantic activity, even, I think, even social activity. For some people, just a social situation causes a sort of an alertness that raises the dopamine system. Okay, so basically, how do we deal with that? We have to be exposed to the world. We have to relate to people. We have to have some social life. We have to maybe be busy at work. Being very busy at work, the more we're under pressure, that raises the dopamine. You know. So how do we deal with that? We have to be in the world. We have to work. Obviously, each one of us is going to have to find a way to kind of bring it down, not all the way, but just regulate it. So, like, say, if you're the kind of person who likes to smoke cigarettes and you like to drink coffee and you like to be in a hurry, I mean, maybe for some people it'd be, can I live without cigarettes and coffee? Can I bring down a little bit the intensity? Okay. So we have to ask ourselves, can we still be in the world, but can we find a way to bring that intensity? And that, to me, is the analogy to somebody who's in a 12-step program or a recovery program for addiction. They have to maybe go to zero, but they're doing something. They're modifying their lifestyle, and they're agreeing to have a limit. In some cases, like, say, alcoholic, their limit is they can't do any alcohol. Okay. In our case, it might be, I'm going to have to bring down from a level of 10. I'm going to have to bring down to 5.5. And then maybe if I have an issue with caffeine or nicotine, or eating really high fat fried or fast food, whatever, maybe almost zero. Maybe just once a week. If I like to watch porn, maybe try not watching a lot of porn, or just watching it like once every 3 months or something. Who knows? I mean, but everybody has to kind of find their set, and that's the agreement. That we're going to have, like, an adjustment of the lifestyle to bring down that dopamine, chronic high dopamine level. And the idea is that that will help maybe to not suppress so much the serotonin level. Maybe if we can just agree that there is kind of a natural inverse relationship, and in my experience, that really is true. As I bring down the excitement of life, okay, and you're going to say, "My God, what's my life going to be without excitement?" Well, that's where the faith comes in. That you could call that spirituality. If I have lived in the world of dopamine, I can't imagine a life without excitement and pleasure and gratification. I can't even imagine it. I feel like I would want to die if I didn't have that, because that's my whole life. Well, you have to believe. You have to believe that maybe there's a part of you that's dead, that's deadened, relatively dead, and we don't even know what that part would be like if we gave it a chance to come to life. You see what I mean? Maybe growing up we never had a chance to feel that. So we have to kind of believe in what seems impossible. That phenomenologically, I can't even imagine what it would be like to sort of voluntarily make my life boring, to make my life. It seems unimaginable. Have faith. There's something else in me that is sort of dormant, you know. And if I can let the excitement come down, that part of me will awaken. Okay, and I have to believe it, and I have to give it time. And if I can sort of balance that, there's that whole other part of me that I have to believe will actually have contentment, happiness, stability that I would never know in the dopamine experience. And I've just come off a week where I've been high dopamine. I got in a couple of arguments. I've been having a lot of pressure at work, a lot of work, a lot of just hurry, and just feeling. I can just feel it, and I can feel there's a part of me that goes away. you know. And so I think that's the other important thing too, is to realize that we are really different people on the inside. There's a whole different person in me. When I can just let that dopamine system sort of go down, and that serotonin person will sort of come to life, and it really is a different person. And we have to be comfortable saying it's not like we're both the same person. No, it's almost like you have two people in you at the same time, and we should be comfortable, that it's okay to have several people inside. It's not a bad thing, and maybe we should give room to the other. So So that's the idea for a recovery strategy.